We're in here in semi-darkness, but at least it's not as cold as it has been. And I'm sitting here with the wonderful Dominique Le Gendre, and I'm going to say a bit about her. As you can see, I've got numerous pieces of paper here. This is just how she was terrified, saying, "Those are not all the questions." I said, no, you're fine. Those are my musings. What we're going to do, we're going to have a conversation for about 45 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions from you. So I'll say a bit about Dominique. Born in Trinidad and Tobago and living in London since the late 80s, Dominique is a groundbreaking composer and music producer who went from playing in church and composing calypsos as a teen to training as a classical guitarist in Paris with Ramon de Herrera, studying harmony with Yvonne Desportes and musicology at the Sorbonne. And now I'm sitting here saying all these great things about you, just sit and go, okay, right, I'm looking really cool. She has worked with theatre companies, film collectives, and co-founded arts charity Strongback Productions in 2013 with Patricia Kumper, which combines literature and music in innovative projects, some of which we're going to explore. Dominique became the first female composer to be commissioned by the Royal Ballet and Opera, Ballet and Opera, and has worked with BBC Proms, Talloworth Theatre Company, and internationally, including with Ensemble du Monde in the USA and the Coro de Madrigalistas in Mexico. She's collaborated with a wide range of artists, including directors Adjoa Ando and Lynette Linton, in the All Women of Colour production of Richard II at Shakespeare's Globe in 2019, which was phenomenal. I remember seeing that. And she's composed and produced music for all 38 Shakespeare's plays for the audio CD collection, The Complete Archangel Shakespeare, directed by Clive Brill. So, in terms of the numerous reviews for her work, these are two that stuck out for me. There was a luminous charm in Le Gendre's glittering score in a musical language, which is in The Guardian. And Le Gendre is a skilled orchestrator, has a sensitive feel for the human voice. She can bring the auditorium to stilled rapture. And that was in The Independent. So welcome, Dominique.
Thank you.
And also, welcome back to Brixton, where you lived for a time.
Over 27 years.
Wow. I mean, just like Paulette Randall beforehand, who was born here. So.
But I still work here because Strongback actually, our offices are registered in international house. So I still come down here at least once a week. If you all can't hear me when I'm speaking, please say so, because I tend to speak softly. So just say it louder.
So before we start the conversation proper, I think it'd be great to hear and see some of your work. And you've chosen a trailer, Jab Malassi, a musical theatre you composed with librettist, double bassist Caitlin Kaminga, and produced by Maria Nunez and Calabash Foundation for the Arts, and it took place in Trinidad. So I'm going to hand over for you to sort of set the scene or say a bit about it, and then we're going to show some of the trailer.
So Jab Malassi actually was an idea that was proposed to me by the American bassist Caitlin Kaminga, who was based in Trinidad. She still lives in Trinidad, she and her husband. They went to Trinidad in I think 2010 as part of a cohort of American and English musicians who were hired to form a symphony orchestra. This was a big project that the then Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, sort of wanted to kickstart. So he had an all-female orchestra, a big band orchestra, a symphony orchestra. And he was advised by some wise people that rather than having like 100+ musician symphony orchestra in a country where they don't have enough concerts to keep them busy, reduce the orchestra and make it a teaching orchestra. And it came at a good time because they had just started this University of the Performing Arts. So little by little, the orchestra, lots of people left because they realized now they weren't going to hang around and wait to be called by the Prime Minister or whoever to play a gig. So the small band of musicians that stayed on to be part of the faculty included Caitlin. And Caitlin wanted to do a piece of music that could be part of the repertoire for Trinidadian musicians to play in the symphony orchestra. Anyhow, so she hit on this idea of adapting Stravinsky's Soldier's Tale to Trinidad. So she rewrote the libretto. She wrote a libretto following exactly the same rhythm of the words of Stravinsky's libretto. And just to give you a hint, Stravinsky's libretto starts off with up a hot and dusty hill, heading and she started off with exactly the same rhythm. And you'll hear that rhythm in the extract. I think you'll hear it in the extract that we're showing. But everything else, also the whole setting is Trinidad, and the story is a young musician called Starboy who plays the violin, and one day when he's kind of walking down the hill, he lives in this place called Lavantil, which is quite a depressed area, but has one of the most important steel band sides in Trinidad. And so he's walking down the hill, and these two characters sort of accost him and offer him this book, a book that tells the future, in exchange for his violin. And he accepts the bargain, except what he doesn't realize is that he's made a bargain with the devil. So in Stravinsky's tale, there's just the soldier, the devil, and a dancer. And I decided, oh yes, and a narrator. And the dancer is a non-speaking part. And I decided to make the narrator male and female. Caitlin made the narrator a security guard. And I decided to make male and female versions of them. And same thing with the devil. So the devil now in Jab Malassi is the worst incarnation of our carnival characters, which is a Jab Malassi, or the black devil, which is covered in molasses. But of course, who symbolizes everything that is evil, questionable, and who you have to sort of fight against.
What you know about setting me up? This baby here gonna set me up and set me down, then I getting out of town.
Just saying, you look like trash. You need cleaning up. What you got to lose for seeing what's up? Starboy have a look from beginning to end, but this book ain't easy to comprehend. That boy clever, but he ain't smart. Ought to walk away right from the start.
I get the words in my head like you said, but my head hard can't be read.
You go get it, wait and see.
Thing is, if it worth all that, my baby here, you think you want? My aunt, she give it me. Auntie Rose found it one day. She think it her great uncle Clay's. She say he trouble like me, and since we alike, she give it me. But ain't worth nothing, you see.
Don't need a history, Starboy. Why you care what I think? It's a good deal for you. Just give me a wink.
All right then, I in. This book do what you say. I get another fiddle on Tuesday. Old man, I gonna give you a hint. That's why you're still vending. I gonna make me a mint.
He's scratching his head now.
Starboy is
He wondering what's what.
on this street of his.
I go find mama. She be up on the hill.
Even the cat's looking at him strange from the windowsill. But
When his mama see him, she dropped to her knees. She made the sign of the cross and start to weep. He's starting to get it now. He sit down hard as he see in a dream his girl in the big yard. She whining and grinding and moving her hips. She got the most delicious lips, but she falling with a man that in him. She played mass with a saga boy named Slim. She a princess, a carnival queen, and when she see him, she start to scream. Yeah, he getting it now, boy. It wasn't 3 days he gone,
like a year.
more like a year.
But what's that he sees down at her feet? A little girl looking so sweet. Saying, up mama, who that man? Everything quiet now except for the child. Who that man, mama? She say looking wild. Who that man, mama? Who that is? That his woman, but the girl ain't his.
Yeah, he getting it now, boy. It real clear.
It wasn't 3 days he gone, but 3 years.
Here comes the bands, with the banners and the flags. Beautiful girls and glistening ties, next to some monkey ones. All forms of the female flesh, whining and grinding, still looking fresh. Juve morning and the music getting loud. The band pass by and he feeling proud. His head start to fill in a mysterious way. He sit there listening for the rest of the day. The revelers gearing up now. Then a girl collapse.
Yo, boss, you want her? She all yours, one eye like him, all fours. She a princess, a real queen, but she gone now. See what I mean? Got to carry on, dog.
Help a guy out.
She all yours if you want her.
He said with a shout.
And then he
joined
went back up in the band and
Starboy
Starboy
left with a princess in the hands.
So rich and vibrant. How does it feel watching your own work?
Is a mixture of things, you know. It's like there's loads of, I mean, first of all, there's a huge affection for that and love for that production, because it took us about 2 years to actually get to performance, and that, I mean, we actually succeeded in getting to performance because of the devotion of the producer Maria Nunes, who took it on, because this was really new for Trinidad. Nobody had ever done anything like that in Trinidad for a very, very long time. When Derek Walcott and his Trinidad Theatre Workshop, when they were alive, and there was a time throughout the 80s and 90s and early noughties where theatre was really, really alive, with a lot of creation, a lot of innovation. But something that was music theatre like this hasn't been done, really, not for a very, very long time. So it was, and there's no obvious routes to finding money. So Maria literally just got all the major businesses and banks behind it to support it. And we had serious rehearsal time, serious music rehearsal time, and we worked with quite a few of the young students also from the academy, because it was supposed to be a teaching experience for them. So it was really rich. It was a really enriching and just fulfilling experience.
I want to stay with Trinidad actually and take you back a bit. But actually, before I do that, I want, bearing in mind the journey you went on to get this off the ground, and like you said, 2 years, and all the different funding streams you had to access. I want to quote you back at you. You say, it seems very difficult for Western Europe to conceive of music in the classical tradition coming from places other than Europe and from composers other than what they're used to. And you said this in response to the question, I know it's going to get your haunches up, of if you saw yourself as a black composer. So I just want to get your take on that, because you know, you could transpose composer with a writer, even in terms of cricket, because things that are seen as classically for the white elite. And so is that something that you've had to battle in terms of being pigeonholed, and what your challenge is with being called a black composer as opposed to a composer? No, I mean, one of the ways that I would qualify that, and I think most people who have grown up who were born in the Caribbean and grew up for a while in the Caribbean and then came here as adults, what most of us have found is that it's only since we're in Europe or countries other than our own that suddenly you become a color and not a nationality, you know? So that's always a little bit strange. And over years, you know, I've grown accustomed to it. I've learned to kind of accommodate myself to it. But at heart, essentially, I'm a composer. I'm a Trinidadian composer. And I definitely can't take the Trinidadian out of myself as a composer. And it's not so much because I'm black, it's because I'm Trinidadian. Mm-hmm. Trinidad shaped me, you know, so that's what I am. Okay, well that segues nicely into the fact that growing up in Trinidad, music featured across the generations in your family. I mean, your great-grandmother trained as a classical pianist in Paris, where you ended up to do classical guitar, and your brothers were musicians. And you also say music is your life, it's a way of life and a way of thinking about life. Yeah. Does that feel like pressure?
No, God, no. No. Anything else feels abnormal. I know what I'm doing when I'm doing music and when I'm sort of thinking of life through music. And I know I'm not good at doing life in any other way, so.
It was understandable because you left Trinidad and went after your A-levels to study classical guitar, and you learned to play the saxophone. You worked with a range of different people. I mean, so what was it actually like leaving a country where you were part of the majority and going to France where you were a minority in a field where you would be very few and very far between?
Well, let's say it was educational.
You're also very tactful. Expand, please.
Well, it was that same thing. You know, it was the first time I sort of encountered notions like how strange my accent was, or, you know, that it's the first time that I suddenly encountered the notion of difference in a big, big way. And I think because I was young, and also because I was just bent on learning, I kind of ignored it and didn't really take it on, and just kept tracing, going where I wanted to go, you know. So didn't really take it on. Until suddenly I realized that what I expected, what felt like it should be normal for me to do, suddenly I started realizing, no, but there are barriers, or, you know, people are not interested in certain ways of looking at the world. Or, you know, when you suddenly present them with a different way of looking at the world, that then becomes classified as other, or, you know, as marginal, and you kind of go, but no, that's how we think in Trinidad. How could that be marginal? You know, I had a tendency, and I think maybe everybody does, I had a tendency to think, well, Trinidad was the center of the world. because it was the center of my world. So, and I came with that. I came with a sense and a spirit that all of us who were born in the independence years, sort of like the first 20 years post-independence, we were sort of imbued through our education with this sense that you had to go out into the world and take your place. But you were doing it in the name of Trinidad, And it was right, you were supposed to do that. There was nothing wrong with that. You were expected to do that.
Thinking about, because people, there's I think a tendency to disassociate carnival type music from classical, but you are very passionate about carnival and its legacy and the whole idea of rebellion and a way of being seen and being heard. How then did you navigate holding on to that identity within the classical tradition in a country that's not of your origin? Especially when you think about all the different indigenous Americas, Middle Eastern, African and other influences within Trinidad. That's a lot to carry.
Well, again, it didn't feel like a lot because you just do. I mean, when you grow up with it, it's part of you. When you get used to expressing yourself that way. And so what seems strange to me is why that would feel weird. It's like, so for example, in the classical music world, just to give you an example, is like they would talk about fusion music. And the idea of fusion music being music that fuses different influences. And in Trinidad, there are distinctions between the different types of music. For example, like there's a heavily Spanish influenced music which is called parranda, which comes from our Venezuelan heritage. There's the music which comes from the Indian population, which is both Bollywood and also classical traditions. But then even within that Indian classical traditions, we've always had musicians who have done their thing of merging sitar and their classical traditions with steel pan and with jazz. That's always been normal for them to mix and just to put their instruments together and to speak. Basically, people have always been speaking to each other, and the same thing particularly with the steel pan. The steel pan has become a home not just of calypso and steel pan music, but a rich, rich home for classical repertoire, because the steel band leaders realized this would actually be something interesting for European audiences to hear, or North American audiences to hear a steel band side performing classical music on a steel pan orchestra. And when people hear like a whole Beethoven symphony or whatever being performed on a steel pan, they kind of go, how is that possible? Plus they learn it all by heart. They learn all the music, they learn all these symphonies by heart. So that in itself is really kind of blows people's minds. So.
Because there isn't a tradition of compartmentalizing music, in a lot of black countries, whereas because of the whole hierarchical approach to everything, that is something that I would imagine impacted just some of your choices, which we're going to talk about in terms of your career trajectory as well. I mean, and also this whole idea of catharsis and transformation, because the way that you, like I say, it's interesting because when I was sort of doing the research on this, and you speak in this is a containment, but yet your approach to musical expression is incredibly expansive and multi-layered. And you say, music is a ritual and cathartic experience that embraces as many people as possible. So, and you come out renewed. So what's clear, you have a sort of tendency to collaborate. I mean, I want to think about who you haven't worked with in terms of children's choirs, adult choirs, being in the north of England. So your process sounds very cinematic in terms of it's not like this. And the fact it's almost like quite like you've got tentacles because you seem to bring a range of people with you. Have you always held that vision about music not just being about the self, but about community, whatever that community or ecosystem is?
Yeah, that. I guess maybe that just comes also from my experience of music, because when I was growing up, apart from the fact that you hear music all around you, like we hear the steel pans rehearsing all the time, but we would also hear at night you always heard drums playing. And there were always people in various bits of the community who would gather at night wherever, and they would play drums, and church music. I played in the church choir for a long time, for years, and loved that because it was just, apart from the fact that it was a whole big social thing, gathering as well, because it was loads and loads of young people. It was a great way to meet lots of other young people who also love music, but it meant also that every weekend I was doing gigs. I was playing for weddings, christenings, funerals, church.
How young were you when you were doing
Well,
this?
I started when I was 11. I started doing this at the age of 11, from 11 right up to about 16, 17, and then I stopped because I had to really study for my A-levels. So, but every weekend was a gig, so it was fun. I really liked it.
And when you finished studying at Sorbonne, a lot of your peers started to move into the jazz re-emergence and re-burgeoning, because that's what jazz always does as an experimental form. And moved into world music, but you didn't. You started to compose music for experimental films for your friends. Why that choice?
Because I think actually because it's interesting, because you're talking about my approach being kind of cinematic. I'd always wanted to write music for films, and I always, and also when I was in Trinidad when I was about 17, I worked with this video production company called Banyan Productions, and they were sort of a pioneering group that filmed. First, they started off as a theatre company, and then they started making films and videos about every single island, every single aspect of our culture. And I worked with them as a runner. And I got to work with all the big actors in Trinidad and the Caribbean at the time, and help out on a series and documentaries. So it was great fun for me. It's like I love that. And in my mind, it's like I always had this thought that I wanted to write music for films. And I never saw myself as a musician, even though I trained as a classical guitarist. That was a route into music and into composition. Because it's a long story, but there were a lot of things lacking in my musical background, in my musical education, that sort of would not have made it possible or easy for me to get into a music conservatory to study composition. And also the way in which studies take place, or music is studied in France, is very, very conservative. Either you're training to be a soloist, or a very formal avant-garde composer, or nothing in between, or you're going on to education. And America and I think the UK were a lot more open at the time, but for family reasons I stayed in France. So that was why I kind of moved more into composition, because like I said, I never really saw myself as a musician. That wasn't my intention. It was to compose. I played, but my intention was always to compose.
And you landed in London in the late 80s. And, the thing as well that you talk about is interconnectedness and connectedness between people, and the fact that, I suppose in a way, you've got your community who are still with you. And it's just interesting that a lot of them are on this inadvertently, not planned. It's because one of the first commissions you received was for the Theatre of Black Women, Bernardina Baristo, and obviously Paulette Manda was one of the co-founders along with Patricia St. Hilaire. So, so you landed your first commissions from a Black women's theatre company, and women feature really prominently as well. You talked, what we saw, what you produced in Trinidad, predominantly women team.
Yeah.
So what was that like when you came? What were your expectations when you came to the UK?
I actually didn't have any expectations. I was just glad to get a job and to be offered a job. And to be offered an opportunity to write music for a theatre company. And to know that the play was actually going to tour all around schools and stuff, the music was going to be heard. And because there were no opportunities like that in France, in Paris, where I was living at the time. And so for me, it was just like huge joy, And then one job kind of led to another.
What was the first thing you did with them?
First thing that I did was with Theatre Black Women, and it was a play for children called Miss Quashie and the Tiger's Tail. And then that led to another job with a mixed able-bodied and disabled company called Double Exposure. And they were an offshoot of a company called Grey Eye that existed at the time. And some of the Grey Eye members had sort of moved on to form this company, Double Exposure. So the first job that I did with them, with Double Exposure, was a device piece for a youth theatre group at the Cockpit Theatre. I think that was in 88 or so. Yeah, 88. And then from that, that just kind of led to a whole bunch of other things with Avon Touring, Women's Theatre Group, Theatre Centre, lots of work with Theatre Centre, where a lot of actors who have now come up, like Adjoa and Michelle, what's her name, Michelle? I forget her surname. She was in the film with Hard Truths. She's the other sister.
Oh, right, yeah, who was in the bill.
Yeah. A whole bunch of actors came through Theatre Centre. Yeah, so it was like I say, one job just led to another, and then that led on to, again, connections. A friend from Trinidad, who was a friend from school, junior school, high school, came to live in Paris, ended up staying by me for a while, and moved over here to do film school. Frances Ann Solomon. Frances Ann worked at the BBC. She became a radio producer. And Frances took a whole bunch of us with her into radio drama. And we started working, writing music for I started writing music for radio dramas. And that led on to working with other radio producers. So like I say, it's like one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. And it's just kind of followed like one long snake.
So you moved from film to then pure audio and theatre and then audio.
Theatre and radio, yeah.
And I mean, and there's something that I was mindful of during our initial conversation about how you navigate safely and safety. Because by your own admission, you said and you've shown that you worked with predominantly women-led, black women-led, able-bodied and disability organisations, and not so much white-led organisations.
Well, the BBC was a white-led.
Well, okay,
and
so not as much, not like, yeah.
And I worked with a lot of other producers, the producer who hired me to do the Shakespeare collection, Clive Brill. Clive is East End English gentleman who actually grew up selling shoes on Brixton Market with his dad.
Working class. Because you're saying that you've not, as a part of your career trajectory, tried to gain admission into white-led spaces. I suppose that's even more specific. And you said it takes you outside of the scenario of threat. So I'm just curious about what that threat was.
So when you say threat, what do you mean?
I'm asking you, because that came up in our conversation.
So like I've been invited. I mean, it's interesting because when I was at the Royal Opera House, that was an introduction through Nitro, and then the Royal Opera House invited me to become an associate artist, and commissioned my first full-length opera. And they commissioned lots of other work from me as well. And I was there probably for about 4 years or so. And similarly, it's like ever since I've been sort of writing and being commissioned by other orchestras, it's been on invitation. Sometimes I've proposed projects, and I'm seeing now that they're starting to bite. And also I have an agent, so that makes a difference.
I was going to say, what was taking so long, because I got the impression that, like you said, they're coming to you, but in a way you weren't really seeking them out necessarily.
No, because I didn't know how to.
Okay.
Also, I didn't know. It took me a long time to decide to write music just for the sake of music. And the invitation into the Opera House was sort of like the key. It was a door opening to that, to that path of just writing music for the sake of music. And to be honest, because I didn't study in this country, I didn't train in this country as a musician or composer, so I wasn't too sure of the roots into different places.
Not much has changed, because it's still opaque, whether it's published or otherwise. That's so it's not. Trust me, I think there's a long legacy of that.
Pick up bits from conversations or.
So it sounds like when you were offered things, you said yes, because like you said, you did your Bird of Night, your first full-length opera, which was based off a one-actor from 2003, but you did the full-length opera in 2006, and you've infused it yet again with your musical sensibilities and legacy of Trinidadian music.
That was encouraged. Again, give credit where credit is due. That was encouraged by the then artistic director of the Opera House, Elaine Padmore. When she invited me to become an associate artist, and she talked about commissioning the opera, she was saying to me, "So what sort of opera would you like to write?" And I was kind of going, "Not sure yet." She said, "Why don't you stick with the Trinidadian themes? You're very good at them. And those are stories that could be told." And I was very surprised. I said, "Would they go down here?" She said, "Try it." She was the one who said, "Just try it. Let's see."
What was the reception?
It was very mixed. People either loved or did not like at all. So.
When you say some people, was there any sort of trend?
No, on the whole, I have to add, to be perfectly fair, actually, audience reception was often very, very warm. But I think the critics was kind of like split. Half just hated the whole idea of somebody foreign getting that commission, and they decided they weren't going to like it in any case. And some kind of tempered themselves, and others gave really good, solid criticism. Good, fair criticism.
And you are so connected to the Caribbean, and there's things going on there in terms of, so you've got the Caribbean Opera Festival in Trinidad and Tobago, were you involved with in 2016, the Caribbean Opera Festival in Trinidad and Tobago, and so it's the Festival of Afro-Caribbean Composers, which is a festival that's brought around Caribbean composers. And I mean, the fact that these things exist, I mean, one, I don't think we hear that much about that over here, but the fact that these things are built around Caribbean composers, and you're part of that while being here. How important are those communities and those opportunities, and what's coming through from other Caribbean composers?
First of all, those opportunities are really, really important as places of exchange and conversation, and also visibility. And they happen through the academies, through the universities. And it's really important for composers, Caribbean composers, to see each other. Most composers, in fact the majority of Caribbean composers, don't live in the Caribbean, because it's impossible to live in the Caribbean. They have to live and teach elsewhere. A lot of them are in Canada or in North America or other parts of Europe. And funnily enough, it's American professors and musicians who are in the Caribbean teaching the instruments or specialty subjects in the Caribbean. And so this, it's sort of between everybody, they organize these symposia and sort of convene composers from across the world to come. And it's a fantastic place to hear each other's work, you know, to become aware of the type of music that people are composing, and also how people continue to articulate the Caribbean through their music. That's the real importance of it.
And how would you, because I think again people have an idea, I would imagine, of who and what a composer is and what they do, and obviously you do more than just composition, you know, but how would you describe yourself as a composer? What's, you know, and through your lens, what type of composer would you say you are?
That's a really hard question. Gosh, that's a really hard question. How would I describe myself as a composer? Well, the music that I write is, I guess I would say, it's very melodic, rhythmic, harmonic, and tonal, which in a way doesn't mean anything to anybody who is not a musician. I guess what I would say is that it follows in the tradition of the classical, European classical tradition, but it also integrates folk music, all of our folk music from Trinidad and from the Caribbean, as well as sort of just being always open and sensitive to the world around me. So it's like my sense of sound is always evolving. That's the best way I could put it.
And who your influence has been, or what has influenced you since coming over to Britain? How has your repertoire widened?
I think the short answer to that is really just living in Britain and seeing there is an openness here that does not exist in any other European country. Seriously. And I know that the opportunities that I had in this country, I would not have found them, certainly would not have found them in France. I'd be surprised if I'd found them in any other country in Europe. And just the exposure, I mean, I've been really, really lucky because I was able to be exposed and get opportunities to work in theatre, radio drama, TV, dance, arts, you know, film, as well as just music for the sake of music, and playing in bands and all sorts of stuff. So, and make a decent living, you know, and you know, and work with really, really good musicians. So, I don't think it's, I know I definitely wouldn't have had those opportunities in Trinidad or in the Caribbean.
Do you think you've expanded the parameters of what composition looks like? Because even just from what you said, it's broader than I think most people's general understanding of who a composer is. And I want to talk about some of just the range of your work. You know, from musical direction of rum and Coca-Cola, love the title. And also cross-region, because like Tallowa, West Yorkshire Playhouse, English touring theatre. When you've collaborated with a practical philosopher. Who knew? You know, Aisha de Lanarol, right? Yeah, exactly. And then you were part of a festival inspired by rivers, estuaries, and water. The whole idea of biodiversity. You know, and you did a TED talk on that with such passion. I thought it's like, I want an estuary, you know. So, you know, I think that, you know, it's almost like you don't just do. I mean, one, the ability to collaborate, because a lot of the time people think artists are precious, but you seem to chase collaboration, and you seem to be able to hold all these moving parts and still, it doesn't suppress your creativity. It seems to inspire its expansion instead. So, and also the next generation. I mean, like I said about, what was it again? You also did the Great Song of the North, like you do. You know, work with a range of choirs, and it seems like you embed yourself in communities. So I can imagine you're doing some stuff in Rye at the moment. I can imagine, oh yeah, we know Dominique, because it feels like you come and you just make the connections and you connect people all very gently.
But for me, it's a great way. It's the best way of learning. It's like being with people, being in I don't really know this country. I came here as an adult, so for me to know this country and to try to understand how it works, how people think, to kind of get a sense of what is the music of this country, which is very, very different from one place to the next. The way in which people live with music, what it means to them. That's why when I did the project up in Northumberland around rivers, estuaries, and their musical archive, it was a huge learning curve, because suddenly I discovered there was this very vibrant folk music scene that starts when kids are this high. And there are children this high, who on a Sunday, they go and spend the whole Sunday playing violin, playing all these folk songs, folk tunes. And the person who runs it has been running it for years, for nearly 20 years, voluntarily, just because it's really important. And things like that, they blow my mind, one. Two, it's like, in a way, it's sort of like in the same train as, or it's along the same kind of line as all of those people throughout the Caribbean who every weekend they go on, they're training kids to either play steel pan or play music or be moko jumbies, stand up on stilts and do all these still dances and stuff. And to me, that's just important.
For each genre or form or environment, you take a different approach, but it intrigued me that you come up with this composition, then you're thinking about how the audience is going to receive it, the position of the audience, the singers, so even though you're saying about this chaos, you seem to have this capacity to hold such a, not just intersectionality, but you're thinking of everything, because it feels to me that that will be handed over to someone else. You don't, you come in, it's incredibly holistic, and you're thinking everything through. What would the audience experience be from when they walk in? Positioning, tonally, the levels. So at what point can you step away and say, okay, I'm done? Or does that never happen?
No, it does happen, but deadlines are very good for that. They have to happen.
But don't they cart you out saying, look, we're going to come on now, can you?
No, and that's another thing that I seriously, that's one thing that makes me so anxious. The idea of being late, of handing in work late. I've only ever done it once. It happened to me, I think it was last year. And I was nearly sick, but it was unavoidable. If I have a deadline, I have to finish long before the deadline, because I need time for it to kind of sink in. Because also, that's the other thing, is like, when you're writing, when you're creating something, until it's completely finished and you have gone back to the beginning and sang it into your body, you have no idea what it sounds like. You have no idea how it works. You have no idea of what you've done. And also the thing is, I write on pen and paper. I don't use a computer, and I use piano. So I don't use I don't use a music program. So it can only ever play back in my head what I've written.
And that's why I think it's really important for what you do to be even more visible, because you're so steeped in these communities and go, bye, you leave and you've left them this gift of self and of imagination. And something that drives you is about having conversations. And I would imagine that's what's going on in your head, and then you transform that into something tangible for people and you leave them. So you've got all these little dotted living legacies around the place. And I just think it's, I think I can feel my PR hat coming on and introducing you to the Ezra Collective to say, do you know about Dominique? You too should. But they must be do. So
I'd love to.
but I just want to wrap up now, and I wanted to ask you something, and then end on a quote from you. If you were an instrument or a musical genre, what would it be?
If I was an instrument, I would definitely be a guitar.
What type?
Either quattro or classical guitar.
Okay, and again, get your agent to make sure you get sponsorship from you saying those two things. And why have you why guitar? You just like.
I realized it's like I always thought I would be a pianist. So I mean, I started off piano first, but then our teacher died, and so I was given a guitar. And I realized the guitar really is my instrument, is who I am.
So clearly, music is your love language, and I want to end on something you said. How can I use music as a force for creative regeneration and reconnection with our natural environments, our cultures, our pasts, our presents, and the very best within ourselves? You posed that as a question, and I'd say we look forward to enjoying you continuing on this quest. All right, so thank you so much, Dominique.